There is a unique and profound kind of pain that exists in the silence after a failure. It's the hollow echo in a quiet office after you've read that rejection email for the 10th time. It's the heavy weight in your chest as you pack up the remnants of a business you poured your soul into, watching a dream dissolve into data and debt. It's the phantom ache of a relationship that ended, leaving you to sift through memories that have suddenly sharp, painful edges. In these moments, failure feels absolute. It doesn't just feel like a setback, it feels like a verdict, a final damning judgment on your talent, your worth, and your very potential. The world seems to move on, indifferent to your personal cataclysm, and the internal voice of self-doubt begins its relentless chorus: you weren't good enough, you didn't try hard enough, you are a fraud. This is the critical juncture where most people break. They allow that single event to become the entire story, the anchor that holds them fast in a harbor of regret and fear, forever afraid to set sail again. But what if this interpretation of failure is the greatest lie we tell ourselves? What if the very thing that feels like an ending is in fact the necessary and brutal beginning of your true strength? This is the revolutionary argument presented by one of history's most formidable minds, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He was a man who did not merely theorize about suffering from a comfortable distance. His entire life was a battlefield of it. He endured decades of debilitating physical agony, crippling migraines, and near blindness. He watched his brilliant work be met with public ridicule, commercial failure, and utter indifference from the academic world of his time. He died alone, convinced of his own obscurity. Yet from this crucible of relentless anguish, Nietzsche forged a philosophy of incredible power and resilience. He discovered that the path to an unconquerable life does not lie in avoiding pain, but in diving into its very heart and transforming it. He provides us not with empty platitudes, but with a profound psychological framework and a set of fierce, practical tools designed to alchemize our deepest failures into our greatest strengths. This is not about naive optimism. It is about developing a mindset so robust, so resilient, that it renders you anti-fragile, thriving on the very chaos and setbacks that would break others. This is how you ensure that failure, no matter how devastating, loses its power to destroy you and instead becomes the foundation upon which you build an unshakable life. To truly grasp the profound weight of his philosophy, we must first understand the man himself, for the two are inextricably linked. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was not a distant academic spinning theories in a comfortable ivory tower. He was a man whose very existence was a battlefield of physical agony and intellectual isolation. Born in 1844 in Prussia, he was a prodigy, appointed a full professor of classical philology at the University of Basel at the astonishingly young age of 24. His future seemed one of brilliant, conventional academic success, but this promise was quickly eclipsed by a body that betrayed him. From his mid-20s onward, Nietzsche was besieged by a host of debilitating ailments, violent, days-long migraines that left him vomiting and blind in a darkened room, crippling stomach pains, and failing eyesight that made reading and writing a form of torture. His personal life was a landscape of profound loneliness and rejection. His romantic advances were spurned. His groundbreaking books, like Thus Spoke Zarathustra, sold only a handful of copies, and his radical ideas were met with silence or contempt from his peers. By 1879, his health had deteriorated so completely he was forced to resign his professorship, embarking on a lonely, nomadic decade across Europe, living in rented rooms, a stateless wanderer dependent on the support of a few friends. His final decade was spent in silent mental darkness under the care of his mother and sister after a catastrophic mental collapse in 1889, from which he never recovered. This context is everything. Nietzsche's philosophy was not an abstract intellectual exercise. It was the ultimate act of alchemy, performed by a brilliant mind trapped in a prison of suffering. His entire body of work, his glorification of strength, his concept of Amor Fati, his warning that what does not kill me makes me stronger, was forged in the crucible of his own relentless anguish. He was not merely describing a way to overcome life's hardships. He was writing a survival manual, page by painful page, from the depths of his own lived experience, making his insights into resilience not just theoretical, but brutally, authentically earned.
To truly understand how to armor yourself against failure, we must first dismantle our entire perception of what failure represents. This requires a fundamental and profound shift in mindset, a cognitive revolution that lies at the very heart of Nietzsche's philosophy. The cornerstone of this new worldview is his most famous declaration, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." It is vital to recognize that this is not a passive, comforting platitude, but an active, demanding principle, a law of existential physics that Nietzsche observed operating throughout the natural world. He argued that human potential, much like a muscle, does not grow in a state of comfort and ease. Strength is forged through resistance. A muscle must be broken down by stress and strain to rebuild itself thicker and more resilient. In the same way, a forest ecosystem depends on periodic wildfires to clear out old growth, release seeds, and create the conditions for new, more robust life to emerge. Nietzsche applied this same biological and metabolic logic to the human spirit. He saw that a life devoted to avoiding pain and seeking only comfort leads not to happiness, but to a state of stagnation and spiritual decay, what he called passive nihilism. In this framework, adversity is not an interruption of a good life, but an essential ingredient of a great one. Failure, therefore, is not a sign that you are on the wrong path. It is evidence that you are being tested, that you are being given the necessary resistance to evolve. The setback is the anvil, the emotional pain is the fire, and your will is the hammer. This mindset shift is the ultimate act of cognitive alchemy. It reframes failure from a final verdict on your past actions into a necessary training ground for your future self. It transforms the experience from a source of shame to be hidden into a source of strength to be integrated. When you internalize this shift, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" And you begin to ask, "What is this happening for me? What weakness is this revealing that I now have the opportunity to strengthen? What outdated version of myself is this failure dismantling? Make room for a stronger one." This is how you cease to be a fragile victim of circumstance and become the resilient architect of your own character, a soul that doesn't just withstand chaos, but requires it to become truly formidable.
If the core mindset shift provides the philosophical foundation for resilience, then Amor Fati, the love of one's fate, is the daily practice that brings it to life. This is arguably Nietzsche's most radical and profound prescription for human freedom, and it demands far more than passive resignation or stoic endurance. To understand its depth, we must distinguish it from simpler concepts. Stoicism, for instance, teaches us to accept the events of our lives with calm indifference, to build an inner fortress that remains unshaken by external chaos. This is a powerful practice, but Nietzsche pushes us into more transformative territory. Amor Fati is not about building a wall against fate. It is about throwing the gates open wide and embracing it with passionate affirmation. It is an active, ecstatic, and unconditional yes shouted at the universe, a declaration that every moment, every event, every so-called failure, and every triumph is not merely to be accepted, but to be cherished, willed, and loved as if you yourself had chosen it from an infinite menu of possibilities. This is the ultimate act of personal alchemy, to take the base metal of your most painful experiences, the betrayal that shattered your trust, the professional failure that humiliated you, the loss that left you hollow, and not just learn from it, but to place it in the furnace of your will and transmute it into the gold of your character. You are to look at the entirety of your past, without exception,
and declare, "For all of this, I am grateful. I would not will it to have been different, for to reject a single moment would be to reject the very person I have become. This fate is mine, and I love it." This is not self-deception. It is the highest form of self-creation. By willing your fate, you cease to be its victim and become its co-author. You dissolve the poisonous energy of regret and replace it with the generative power of total responsibility. In doing so, you achieve a level of empowerment that is almost unimaginable. You render life itself, in its complete and terrifying totality, good. This is how you forge a soul that is not just unbreakable, but invincible, because it has learned to find its strength not in spite of its history, but directly because of it.
The journey from understanding Nietzsche's profound philosophy to truly embodying it requires a bridge, a tangible, actionable practice that transforms abstract principle into lived reality. This is the critical juncture where many philosophical ideas remain merely intellectual, but Nietzsche's work demands more. It demands a revolution in how we engage with our daily experiences. The first and most vital practical step in this revolution is the conscious application of what can be powerfully termed the reframing hammer. This is not a passive exercise in positive thinking or a simple effort to look on the bright side. Such approaches often feel hollow because they ask us to deny the real and valid pain of our experience. The reframing hammer is something far more profound and transformative. It is an act of intentional cognitive warfare against the automatic, deeply ingrained narratives of victimhood, lack, and finality that our minds construct in the wake of any setback. It is a deliberate, disciplined, and almost surgical process of deconstructing the event, not to avoid the pain, but to transcend it by uncovering its hidden purpose and buried power. The moment failure strikes, your untrained mind will instantly craft a story. I am a fraud. This dream is over. I am not enough. This narrative is like a cognitive prison. The reframing hammer is your tool for breaking out. It begins by forcing a pause, a sacred space between the event and your reaction. In that space, you must initiate a rigorous Socratic dialogue with yourself, armed with questions designed not for self-flagellation, but for archaeological excavation. You must become a detective of your own downfall, sifting through the evidence not to find yourself guilty, but to discover the precise blueprint for your next evolution. This interrogation is the active, practical essence of Amor Fati. It is the will to love your fate by demanding to know exactly why it is worthy of that love. You must ask, with relentless curiosity and brutal honesty, what specific, previously invisible weakness did this failure expose to the light, gifting me with the priceless opportunity to finally address it? Was it a technical skill I lacked, a naive assumption about how the world works, an over-reliance on talent instead of disciplined process, a fear of taking calculated risks? Furthermore, how has this experience, in its brutal efficiency, simplified my path by mercilessly burning away a direction that was not truly aligned with my core strengths, saving the years of misguided effort? What person is this forcing me to become? More resilient, more humble, more strategic, more courageous, that my comfortable former self would never have chosen to become. This practice is alchemy in its truest form. You are taking the raw, heavy, leaden ore of a painful event, and through the intense heat and pressure of this questioning, transmuting it into the gold of unparalleled self-knowledge and strategic clarity. Each time you do this, you are not just analyzing a single event, you are fundamentally rewiring your brain. You are forging a new neural pathway that no longer sees a catastrophe, but a curriculum, a necessary lesson delivered by the uncompromising teacher of experience. This is how you stop being a passive character in the story of your life, battered by plot twists, and become its active author, editor, and protagonist. You are making the choice to force every event, especially the most painful ones, to yield their nutrient of strength and their lesson in wisdom.
You are, through this practice, learning to never let a good crisis go to waste. And in doing so, you are building a self that is not just resilient, but that actively requires and consumes difficulty as its primary source of fuel.
The first step, the reframing hammer, grants you the vision to see the hidden potential buried within your failure. But vision alone is not enough. To truly build the unshakable self that Nietzsche envisions, you must now move from the realm of perception into the arena of action. This brings us to the second, and perhaps most demanding, practical step, the rigorous and relentless practice of self-overcoming, or Überwindung. This is not merely about learning a lesson. It is about initiating a deliberate, often arduous, process of self-evolution. Nietzsche posited that the ultimate purpose of human existence is not the pursuit of fleeting happiness or comfort, but the continuous and willful act of overcoming our current selves. We are not finished products, but dynamic, ongoing projects, works of art that must be constantly chiseled and refined. The self is a battlefield between who we are and who we might become, and failure provides the essential intelligence needed to win that war. This step transforms you from a passive interpreter of events into the active architect of your own character. The primary tool for this architectural process is a practice of deep, fearless, and strategic journaling. However, this is not a diary for venting emotions or cataloging daily events. Think of it instead as conducting a meticulous autopsy of your failure, not with morbidity, but with the precise analytical detachment of a surgeon seeking to understand a disease in order to cure it. This is where you transition from the why of the reframing hammer to the how and the what next. You must take the specific weaknesses, flaws, and blind spots that your initial reframing exposed. Perhaps it was a catastrophic lack of preparation, a critical cowardice in the moment of decision, a paralyzing fear of judgment, or a fundamental naivete about the true nature of the challenge, and place them on the examination table under the unforgiving light of ruthless honesty. Here, you engage in a rigorous Socratic dialogue with yourself, asking forensic questions focused on mechanics, strategy, and personal psychology. At what exact moment did my resolve first waver? What was the specific thought that preceded the critical error? Which comfort did I prioritize over the required courage? What evidence did I willfully ignore, and why? Which personal myth or story about myself did this failure definitively shatter? This journal then becomes the sacred blueprint for your own reconstruction. It is the foundational document where you architect your response and design your new protocols. For every identified failure in your process, you must engineer a countermeasure, a new rule for living that ensures that particular weakness can never dictate your outcome again. If you fail due to inadequate preparation, your new protocol might be a mandatory pre-mortem analysis for all significant undertakings, where you must vividly imagine every possible point of failure before you begin. If you fail due to a fear of confrontation, your protocol might be a personal commandment to always voice the difficult truth within 24 hours of recognizing it. This is the very essence of self-overcoming. You are using the failure as a precise diagnostic tool, a mirror held up to your present limitations, and then you are actively working to surpass them. You are not just learning from the past, you are systematically using it to forge a future self that is immunized against that specific strain of weakness. The failure, in this light, becomes the indispensable catalyst for your metamorphosis. It provides the necessary friction against which you can sharpen your will, the resistance that defines the new contours of your stronger character. This practice is the tangible enactment of what Nietzsche called the will to power. Not power over others, but the drive to extend your mastery and strength over your own nature and your environment.
It is the process of turning the lead of your shortcomings into the gold of capability. By committing to this relentless cycle of forensic self-analysis and strategic redesign, you ensure that no failure is ever wasted. You transform each one into a non-negotiable down payment on a future of unparalleled resilience, capability, and power. You become, in the truest sense, the blacksmith of your own soul, hammering yourself into a form that is not just resistant to chaos, but that requires it for its continued creation.
The journey through Nietzsche's philosophy now brings us to the zenith of personal empowerment, the most profound and radical of all the steps, the sovereign act of creating your new values. This is where you transition from being a player within a game, trying to improve your strategy, to becoming the architect who designs the game itself. It is the ultimate expression of what Nietzsche termed the Übermensch, or overman, the individual who has moved beyond the reactive, herd-like mentality of good and evil to proactively determine the values by which they will live. To truly understand the monumental power of this step, we must first recognize that most of us are living in a psychological prison constructed from inherited values. From the moment we are born, we are immersed in a sea of external judgments. Society defines what constitutes a successful life. Our families instill notions of appropriate behavior. Our cultures dictate what is worthy of praise or shame. And even our religious or educational systems provide prefabricated moral frameworks. We internalize these metrics so completely that we mistake them for objective reality. Therefore, when we experience a setback, a business failure, a rejected proposal, a criticized creative work, the pain is doubly acute. First, from the event itself, and second, and more devastatingly, from the internalized verdict that we have now been categorically labeled a failure by the world's court. This third step is the process of staging a revolution against this internalized authority. It begins with what we can call a values autopsy. This is a deep, fearless, and systematic interrogation of the very definitions you use to judge yourself. You must take the specific event you have labeled a failure and hold that label up to the light of your own conscious awareness. You ask with ruthless honesty, who owns this definition of failure? Did it come from my authentic self, or was it implanted by my parents' expectations, my culture's obsession with certain markers of status, or the superficial metrics of my peer group? Does this definition truly serve my growth and my unique purpose, or does it exist only to keep me in a state of anxiety, conformity, and perpetual striving for a prize I never truly chose? This is not an act of narcissism or self-deception. It is an act of intellectual and spiritual hygiene. It is the process of cleaning the lens through which you view your entire life. Having identified and deconstructed these inherited values, you then engage in the creative act of values engineering. This is where you, from a place of profound self-knowledge and will, design your own personal criteria for success and failure. This is the most practical application of the will to power, the power to assign meaning itself. For instance, if your startup venture did not achieve market success, the old inherited value system screams failure. Your new self-authored value system might state, I value the courage to innovate over the security of conformity. Therefore, the act of creation itself is my success. The market response is simply data that informs my next iteration. If you faced rejection after a heartfelt artistic performance, the herd mentality whispers, you are not good enough. Your new constitution can declare, I value authentic emotional expression and the vulnerability required to share it above technical perfection or popular applause. Therefore, having dared to create and share is my victory. The audience's reaction is their journey, not my verdict. This act of redefinition is the ultimate alchemy. You are not merely reframing the event, you are changing the very universe in which it exists. You are moving the goalposts from a field defined by others to a field of your own design. By doing this, you perform a miracle of psychological sovereignty. You drain external events of their inherent power to define you. A financial loss, a critical review, a social rejection, these become neutral occurrences, like weather patterns. They can be studied, learned from, and navigated, but they cannot tell you who you are unless you grant them that authority by using someone else's ruler. When you craft your own ruler, you become the sole judge of your worth. This is the magnificent culmination of Amor Fati. You are able to love your entire fate, not by pretending every event was pleasant, but because you have built a self so psychologically robust and self-defined that every experience, without exception, can be integrated as fuel for your own self-authored journey. You are no longer a slave to the whims of chance and external judgment. You are the master of your own moral universe, assigning meaning and value based solely on what affirms your life, strengthens your spirit, and expands your power. This is the highest form of resilience Nietzsche offers, the construction of a self that is not merely unbreakable by the world's standards, but gloriously transcendent of them, living by a light of its own kindling.
And so we arrive at the culmination of this journey through Friedrich Nietzsche's profound philosophy, a journey that began in the depths of failure's despair and ends at the summit of personal sovereignty. This is not a path of simple reassurance or quick fixes. It is a call to arms for the soul, a demanding blueprint for constructing a self that is not merely resilient, but anti-fragile, thriving on the very chaos and setbacks that would break a weaker spirit. We began by wielding the reframing hammer, learning to shatter the destructive narratives of failure and to interrogate our pain for its hidden lessons. We then embraced the rigorous practice of self-overcoming, conducting a fearless autopsy of our setbacks to architect a stronger, more disciplined future self. Finally, we ascended to the most radical act of liberation, creating our new values, overthrowing the tyranny of external judgment to become the sole authors of our own worth. This triad of practices, reframing, self-overcoming, and value creation, forms a powerful symbiotic system, a psychological alchemy that transforms the lead of failure into the gold of unshakable character. Nietzsche's promise is not a life free of pain, but a life where pain loses its power to destroy and instead becomes your greatest teacher, your toughest trainer, and your most essential fuel. This is the essence of Amor Fati, to love your fate so completely that you would not will a single moment of it to be different. For every moment has been necessary in forging the formidable person you are still becoming. The challenge now is yours. It is to step into the world and not just face failure, but to seek out the strength it demands, to will the eternal recurrence of your struggles, knowing they are making you stronger, and to build a life so fiercely your own that no external event can ever again hold the power to destroy you. You are no longer a victim of circumstance, but the creator of your meaning, the master of your fate, and the hero of your own unbreakable story.